right, so my talk is the pursuit of impact. It's really about my journey building a thriving team at Netflix. So a little bit about me. My name is Bruce Wang. I'm director of engineering of a team called API Systems. I've held various leadership positions at startups. Been a startup founder. I've been a CTO, VP of a smaller company, director of a smaller company. Um, and so I have a wide variety of experience. And I started at Netflix January of this year, 2020. I can't believe the year is almost over. And so APS Systems is really broken up to two teams. One is the consumer side, which handles the discovery API, which is basically whenever you open up the app and you want to see our list of videos and synopsis and titles and images, that all kind of hits our aggregation layer. And the other team is our federated gateway team, who's in charge of building our federated GraphQL engine, currently powering our Studio Edge product, which is ability to aggregate all the various data backends from all of our kind of behind the scene technology when we're producing content, what we call the pitch to play process. So, you know, I think every great talk starts with some failure, and I think this will be the same. And you know, before I started, I had actually talked to the previous managers and VP who kind of led the overall team, and I wanted to get some information and intel about sort of like, you know, what's it like to lead API systems, and what are some of the challenges they'll face. And one of the consistent things that I've heard was it's one of the best teams at Netflix, one of the most challenging to lead. And sort of that was definitely true, right? So I just give you an idea of when I mentioned the Discovery API. One of the reasons why there's such a big challenge is, if you think about it, we take all the requests from the various UIs, such as, you know, iOS app, the Android app, the web app, and then all the TV UIs, and we sort of like take in all those requests, and then we figure out the right backend services to call. And so it's a lot of services, a lot of teams, a lot of interactions, right? So that's kind of really the primary challenge of leading this team, is this kind of central point where we, you know, kind of call ourselves the hourglass, where a lot of requests coming in, there's that central internal point, and then all our connections to our backend partners. So, you know, when I started, I kind of knew a little bit about this context and partner overload problem with the team. Also knew that the team had a very large scope, right? Given that we basically front a lot of the Netflix APIs, the Netflix microservices, and we basically front it with a coherent unified API. Also facing a little bit of imposter syndrome coming from startups. Netflix was definitely the biggest company I'd worked for, tech company I worked for. And, you know, being surrounded by a lot of really talented engineers and leaders, that also kind of gave me a little bit of worry. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic didn't really help things. You know, I started in January, and by March, we basically shut down the office, and we no longer could meet in person, right? But, you know, I was really excited about this challenge. I joined, and I did all the things, right? All the things you learn and read about, and the various experiences I've had in the past. And, you know, I set up regular one-on-ones with, you know, my team, partners, my boss. You know, I dove right into the hiring process. We had a job rec open, and, you know, I went right into it and started interviewing, sourcing, and looking at candidates. You know, I also took over a very large project early on. So this mentioned one of the teams is a federated gateway team, and we were launching a really big project called Studio Edge, which is sort of that unifying API for all of our studio applications, right? And so kind of dove right in and started attending all the various meetings, trying to just get ramped up, right? And then many, you know, team meetings, company-wide meetings. I participated in this thing called QBR, which is this sort of like quarterly or, you know, semi-regular event at Netflix where you know, kind of directors and above meet from all over the world meet in a single place and sort of get to meet each other and then learn and grow. And so I was part of that. There was also a team meeting offsite in LA with our extended leadership team within our broader org called PEZ. And I came up with after talking to the one-on-ones, I thought like, okay, I think I understand what's going on with the team. I came up with a pithy slogan. I thought, okay, we're going to get jackets and we're going to get some logos, and try and do all these different things to kind of really get energized with the team. And then also started a weekly newsletter where I started documenting kind of what we're working on, and then also planned out this offsite with the whole team, and we're going to talk about like the future and how we're going to grow and really kind of set that vision and tone. And I thought I was doing pretty well, right? And it was a lot of work, it was a lot of stuff to do. And then I started getting the feedback, and Netflix is famous for our feedback culture, and not all of it was great, right? I made some mistakes when it came to candidates, messaging candidates, some professionalism issues potentially in certain meetings. Might have been too transparent with some partners. Some of my colleagues have mentioned to me. Some of my team members was frustrated sort of with the clear vision. Kind of understood a little bit, but really was a little bit confused about the direction and what we're really trying to do. And then, we had a lot of kind of siloed development, right? And that's a little bit of sort of the history of this team is, such a wide scope. You have all these individual engineers who are sort of siloed in their own activity. And it was a very kind of reactive, operator model. And, there was a real risk of burnout, especially when we left the office and we stopped being able to hang out in person. And Netflix has always been really co-located. We have engineering has mainly been in Los Gatos, and, we have people in LA, but that was also a big change for us, and other feedback as well. But, at Netflix, we also say feedback is a gift, right? And kind of taking all this into account and trying to learn and grow from it is sort of when I really got past these challenges and what we call these failures, right? And then I started kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I was able to hire 2 stunning colleagues. They both started at the same time in July. I got some good positive feedback from some of our key partners. I was able to finally create a sub-team within one of the bigger teams, the consumer side, to focus in on UI partners. Started really getting a little more in-depth on the vision of the future of our runtime and how API systems can evolve. And just last week, I presented a vision and sort of some ideas of what we thought we could do for next year. And had really great broad alignment from the partners. And so all this sort of culminated in my thinking about sort of how do you create this kind of team, all these lessons I learned, the ups and downs, what did I learn from it, right? And, I really came down to these sort of 4 phases. While I was working with the team, I was thinking about these 4 different phases that you have to really be good at as a leader. There's the designing of your team. There's the hiring, right? There's the learning environment that you create. And then there's the growing of the individual ICs and engineers. And really these 4 phases really kind of reinforce each other and helps build this strong, impactful team, right? And it was only kind of when I was writing the onboarding plan for, the 2 hires that I really started getting all these pieces into my head and realizing okay, I was doing all these things, but I wasn't thinking of them as a holistic strategy about how I could build this great team, right? So I think the first part, typically where you start, and I did the same, was trying to figure out what does the team exactly do, right? Who are we? And I think the challenge I ran to early on was really having true clarity of what this team did, right? And it's hard to achieve true clarity, right? Early on I thought, okay, I sort of knew the challenges. I on the surface understood some of the problems, Um, and so, when I did the slogan, I did the offsite, it was not necessarily completely clear on what was going on with the team, right? And so I think to design your team, you really have to achieve true clarity, right? And how I did that, or some ideas of how to do that is, be intellectually curious, right? But also be empathetic. It's really, really important to really understand kind of the challenges the team is going through, and really understand where are the gaps, why is this thing happening, and what's really causing it. And it's also important to not turn your questions into an interrogation, which I kind of failed at early on. Is I would ask these questions, but it was misinterpreted like, what are you doing? And that's not really what I was going for, right? The other thing that I think helps a lot with true clarity, is creating margin for yourself. You know, it's about creating that time and space for yourself to really focus and listen and understand what is going on with the team, right? And there's a author, David Cote, who was the former CEO of Honeywell. And he wrote this great book called Winning Now, Winning Later. And he talked about this concept called X days, right? Where we set aside an entire day where we think about strategy. And that's something what you could do is you got to set that time aside and really think about, what does my team do? What is our focus? What are we really trying to achieve here? Right? And the last, I think, is to really pull information from a variety of sources, right? You can ask, obviously, each of your team members. You can ask your boss. You should definitely ask your partners. Kind of really reach out and talk to a lot of different people to form this more complete picture. And that's something that, took a little time to get there. And that's the other thing, is to just realize it's okay that it's going to take a little bit of time, right? So even though your job is to design the team with the charter and the vision, you really got to achieve true clarity and having that time to get there, right? The second, which I think most people understand as a people leader, engineering leader, is hiring, right? That's absolutely one of our most critical jobs as people leaders, is that we have to hire great colleagues, right? But, I think it's really important to think about it like puzzle pieces. You have a team with varying skill sets, and you got to figure out, okay, what's that next best hire? What's that next skill that I would need that potentially could transform the team or make the team different? And so it's very important to not just hire the same kinds of people, but to really think about and challenge yourself on what is really needed, right? And sometimes it's not always, obvious, right? And so really think about what would be an added skill, right? And when you have interviews, really think about the interviews as pieces of the puzzle. My boss, Philip, would say this, is that think about each interview as a piece of the puzzle. As the hiring manager, then you got to put those pieces together to have a clearer picture of the candidate. So you can figure out, okay, where are their strengths? Where are their gaps? And there's no perfect candidate. I think that's something to realize, is really think about what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and how will that fit with the existing team, right? And the next thing is really own your process. Really have a clearly defined process and own it. One of the things that I struggled with early on was I sort of took over the hiring process that my boss, the predecessor of the team, had. And it was great. It was great to, go off of that. But, Netflix is really big on F&R, or freedom and responsibility, and they really want you to take and own this thing. And so it wasn't until I really kind of understood the process. I took the doc, I revamped it, I wrote it sort of with my own tone, and sort of looked at what I was really looking for. It was only until then that I really felt that the hiring process was my own, right? Another, which, having that true clarity can help, but, really have a good, clear, crisp pitch of your role. Finding that great next hire requires clarity. It's not so fun if you just say, hey, you'll work with a bunch of great colleagues. It's really important to say, okay, but then you'll be work on this and this. I remember when I talked to sort of the two candidates who eventually I hired, was really able to pitch and being a little more concrete about what they're going to work on, that made them excited to join us, right? And the last, which I think is useful and something I did, is write a decision doc. You know, when you get far enough, we have multiple rounds, and when I got to about the second round with a candidate, I wrote a decision doc. And some of the candidates I didn't hire, but I still wrote it. And the idea is that you write down those strengths and weaknesses. You write down sort of what would their onboarding look like and how would they be integrated in a team. And it really helps sharpen your idea of what they would bring. And so, it takes a little extra time. It might take an extra 30 to an hour for that hire to write the decision doc. But I think it's really, really key to hiring that kind of next stunning colleague, right? The third part, the learning part, which is what's really interesting and what kind of kicked off this whole concept in my head, was when I was writing the onboarding doc, for my colleague. I realized, like, why do we only write onboarding docs for new hires? And it makes sense. I mean, they're new; they don't really know the system. But shouldn't we always be learning? When I talked to some colleagues, they said, hey, we have such a big scope. It's not always easy to like completely get all the pieces, right, of the system, and to not know all the parts. And so really I thought about, how do you create learning to not just be something that you do when you onboard, but you constantly do, as a team. And some of the things that could help is create a team guide. Have a team guide that makes it very specific about like where the resources are and who to talk to, and what's your on-call look like, and what's your run books, and where's your information. There's kind of this guidebook, which, yeah, it will take a little bit of time to keep up to date, but I think having that, you never know how it could be used by even existing team members, right? The other thing is, earlier I talked about creating time for yourself. Well, you know what? You have to create time for your team, right? Learning doesn't come for free all the time. Sometimes you have to work on prototype projects. Sometimes you have to try things and fail and learn. Sometimes you gotta write something, have that time and be able to articulate it, and then throw it away, right? And so having that time where you don't overstuff your roadmap and to just think about the tactical, you gotta think about, okay, when do you have time to write that kind of detailed technical vision doc, right? When do you have that time to try out this service you want to build because you think it will make it that much easier to work with the team? And you got to prioritize that, right? It's really important. Another great thing we did, and obviously it was easier to do in person, was pair program, and we were missing that. Once we were all remote and virtual, it was hard to pair program, and you have to make an effort, right? We use an app called Tuple, and we have 2 or 3 people sit there and just pair program, or and work together on the same piece of code, and it really allows people to knowledge share. It really unlocked that silo-ness that we had, and that was a huge saver. And then also documenting. I know sometimes it's hard to keep documentation, but documenting your changes, big organizational technical changes with memos, is really important. And then lastly, I think, kind of sum all of it up, is really making learning the default, right? Is that learning is the key for everything, right? And then finally, last but not least, it's really about growing an individual's impact, right? You got to really think about how each individual on your team, just like earlier when you figure out the pieces of how they fit, how they grow also will affect, how you develop this team, right? What if one engineer wants to leave or do something else, or they want to grow in this skill set that maybe you don't have? And with that growth, it may require you to rethink how you would organize, right? And so really taking into account that individual growth will help a lot in determining your team and how it will evolve, right? And parts of this is first is to treat the career path as their own, right? This is their career path, not yours, right? And really to understand what they're looking to do. Now, obviously, you want to be able to hopefully match it up with the needs of the business, but sometimes it may not be a fit, and you have to really take that into account. And another thing is providing coaching, right? Feedback. Being able to provide the feedback to them will help. And both, and you know, positive feedback is important, right? To tell them what they're doing well and what they should continue to do. And something that's important is creating a feedback culture is also ask for feedback as well, which will help sort of provide that atmosphere where you can give each other feedback. And feedback is very important with Netflix as well, and we're sort of known with that. Um, and you know, sometimes it's okay that a team member wants to leave, or you may have to exit a team member because it just doesn't make sense, or the fit isn't right anymore for what you need as a team. But it's got to be important that you clearly articulate the needs and be able to really understand where they want to go, and then figure out the right path for them, right? And so, you know, I talked about kind of the four phases of design: hire, learn, and grow. And it's not necessarily like a, you know, a linear path, right? It's flexibility here is really a virtual, and being able to kind of move between, you know, you might interview someone, realize, oh, there's a skill set I didn't know I needed. Now maybe I can redesign the team. Based on that, I can change the way I you know, talk about, you know, utilizing the growth trajectory of a specific team member, right? And see, that's the key, is this flexibility is truly a virtue, you know. And the last thing is that, you know, I'm still in the pursuit of impact, right? I'm about a year in at Netflix, and I've learned a lot. It's been super challenging, but super fun. And there's still a lot to do, right? There's a lot of work to do for our team. And, you know, that's the thing to remember, is this continual journey, right? This is something as a leader you're going to continue to grow on. And you realize this is the job, right? There should never be an end point where you're like, hey, I'm there and now I'm done, right? Your team will evolve, your goals will evolve, and you will change over time. I think having that pursuit of impact, that continual pursuit of impact, is probably one of the most important things.
Bruce, thank you for your wisdom. I really appreciate that you have this framework for being an engineering manager, or even honestly any team leader, that's very clear and concise, you know, designing, hiring, learning, growing. I also appreciated a little bit of the tidbits about, like, you know, the X days concept. I'm gonna have to check that book out. And then, you know, being curious, which I know is, like, you know, normal. We know as engineers and tech folks, like, we have to be learning every day, you know, state of the art, but not interrogating. Like, that's a good one. I have to reflect for myself, you know, where am I too curious, or I'll try not to interrogate you too much. So yeah, so thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem. I also wore the same clothes, so it makes it look like I did it live and was able to type at the same time.
Oh man, you shouldn't tell people. It would have. I mean, I can already tell you that stuff. Like, just from seeing some of the questions already, people are like, "Man, how do you sleep? You do this all?" And you're like, "You're here." It's awesome. Well, I'm going to dive right into the questions in the Q&A. So, folks, as you have questions, again, on the side of the screen, you'll see that Q&A tab. Go in there, ask your questions. Feel free to upvote questions from others. I'm going to go to the top with the highest upvoted question. This first one from Yongli. How do you manage to get tasks completed when there's so many meetings with so many people, you know, working with the team, write a weekly newsletter? Do you sleep? Do you eat? How do you do it?
No, actually, so I really believe in the deep work book of work normal hours. Work-life balance is actually super important here at Netflix. I think it's about prioritizing your time. Like, you know, I have this Trello board where I keep cards on it. Roughly, I have so many tasks I still need to do, right? Being really efficient with your time, block off time. I try to do 2-hour blocks in the morning. That's where I get all my work done. Now that I'm dropping off kids, it's a little harder to get that 2 hours. The X days helps a ton. I catch up a lot of stuff. I actually don't overwork myself. You know, I found myself, if I have a whole day of meetings, 5 o'clock rolls around, I got docs to work on, I'm completely drained. Like, I can't work on that. And I found when I've made mistakes is when I like hurry things, right? But I think you just, you know, turn off notifications. I don't check my phone. I don't browse. You know, it's something that I just don't. I mean, I browse a ton at home at night, but when I'm at work, I work and I focus. And I think that's the key. And check out the book Deep Work. I think it helps convince you that you don't need to work 100 hours to actually be super effective.
100%. And I mean, I've quoted this before, but, you know, like, you know, in the Industrial Revolution, right, Ford, you know, defined, so to speak, the 40-hour work week. And, you know, prior to that, people were working crazy hours. But the crazy thing was that after that definition, productivity went up, more widgets got out the door, right? That it's not this, people in their minds think about this like that it's like, you know, the more hours equals the more work. But for the exact reason you just described, which is like people can be scrolling on Facebook, scrolling Twitter, scrolling their Instagram, whatever, all day long, and they'd be like, man, I worked a 10-hour day. But like if 4 of those hours are scrolling things, then maybe it really works like a 6-hour day or maybe a 2-hour day, who knows? So I appreciate this idea that, you know, you're focused and you're engaged in what you're doing, you know?
Yeah.
Great. So this next one from Julius, what's the headcount ratio in your team compared to the other teams? And what would be an ideal ratio? The context is to get a sense of how to have resources to clear tech debt while being able to support main business functions.
I mean, that's a really hard question. I don't know if there's a magic formula of like, you need this many engineers to this many managers. It goes back to like, what can you juggle and how you can handle. So I have like 13 direct reports right now. And so Netflix teams are pretty small. And I have 3 teams, you know, one's 4-person, one's 3-person, right? And the other is 6. And so, you know, I think we typically look at 3 to 5 small teams, that kind of 2 pizza box thing, because you can focus and narrow in, right? And it's a challenge. I don't think there's a formula. It depends on every circumstance. Like, you know, my team members always tell me, oh, we could double the team. I'm not sure that would be effective for us. I think that's the thing, is you will know the right ratio when you can actually clear tech debt and have a thriving team and everyone's not overworked and you're delivering to partners. That's your ratio, right? You need to think about, that's the format. You're not trying to hit a number. You're trying to hit the output without destroying your team culture. Right. So,
and different people are capable of different things, right? I admit that, like thinking about 13 direct reports, while it feels like a lot, maybe to me, like what grooves for you and your team and what they're able to do, and if you're able to get in all your one-on-ones, like that can work for you, and maybe it won't work for everyone.
Well, I can't. I'm hiring a manager because I can't. It's too much. But yeah, there is a number. Like, look, everyone gives this kind of. Once you pass 10 direct reports, what I found is it makes it almost impossible to give the attention and detail that you should be giving to each report. I think that's the problem, is how are you showing up as a leader? I found multiple times where I have one-on-ones and I'm like not prepared because I had too many meetings, I had too many things. And so, you know, we have this Slack check-in, I could easily read it. I don't have time. And so I find my one-on-ones with them are so ineffective because I'm just too busy. And so that's like an indicator. It's like a leading indicator that maybe you have too many people. I had to change it to every 2 weeks. I used to do every week. It was just like, I couldn't do every week. It was just impossible. So.
Sure. I've definitely heard like a little bit of this, you know, the magic number is, which also happens to be in, you know, in psychology and 101, you hear the number of things you can keep in your head, right? 7 plus or minus 2, give or take.
Yeah.
That resonates with me, that once you get to 10, you know, it gets crazy.
Yeah.
This next question for Mark, how do you encourage getting useful feedback?
Yeah, actually, so we did this internal training where we talked about, you know, feedback is a big thing here. And the problem with giving feedback during a pandemic is you got to think about the threat levels people have and how do you maintain sort of like calm, right? So there's this SCARF model, which is how do you not affect status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness with your team when you're giving feedback. So you might give a feedback and it's like, person's like, that's not fair. I'm busy with this. And why are you giving me? So one thing that was suggested is ask for feedback, is ask for specific feedback. So instead of you giving feedback, you actually ask for feedback and you basically create a feedback culture, because inevitably the person will say, do you have feedback for me? Right. And it just makes it easier because they found that giving feedback, the feedback giver has the same anxiety as the feedback receiver. And so when you ask for feedback and you're basically inviting the other person to give you the feedback, that helps a lot. And so I'm going to publish a blog with the link to the ask for feedback link. It's really, really powerful. And that's something I try to do, is ask for specific feedback, like what's holding back the team, or in this presentation that I gave, like how prepared do you think I was? And then you just kind of open the gates there. And I would say I'm okay at giving feedback, but I found asking for feedback helps a lot.
I love that. I'm reminded of the crucial conversations framework where they talk about, making it safe is kind of that first step before you engage in a high sensitivity conversation where stakes are high. What better a way to make it safe than to ask for feedback, because you're demonstrating your reciprocity. You're demonstrating that you want to hear, that you want to know how you can do better, how the team can do better. And then suddenly it feels safer for that person to receive that feedback back. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, that's the best feedback I got from the team was when I asked. I was like, wow, this is great feedback. I wish I got this earlier.
Totally. I mean, you're expressing empathy in a lot of ways when you're asking for feedback, right? So I can see how it can make it feel safer. This next question from BC, can you give examples of too much transparency with partners? I will confess, this is one of the reasons why I could never be a salesperson in negotiations, because I'm just want to tell everything like it is. And I think a lot of engineers who aren't used to being in conversation with partners may kind of be like too transparent, but transparency is a good cultural value. Like tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think the thing that kicked off was when I had a team meeting, a team-wide meeting where we're trying to build the roadmap for like 2020, right? I had invited a couple of partners because they were kind of key partners for us. And I had thought, hey, this is great. It's transparent. We can work with our key partners. They're here. We could have this really great conversation about, like this strategy with GraphQL, and it'll be great, right? And it was like, I totally messed up. Like my team was like, why did you invite these other people into the team? Like it kind of ruined the flow. The team didn't feel as safe to talk about stuff. And so that's an example where like I kind of like brought in things into the team where I maybe should have just like kept it to ourselves first. And then others is where, I'll have conversations with partners and I'll try to like summarize. And obviously if there's information that's confidential, I don't post that, but I try to summarize what we talked about. And I think sometimes people are like, that's a lot of information. Like, why are you posting our one-on-one conversations in this newsletter? And so I try to like keep it useful. And I think, look, I lean towards transparency, and I rather get comment on that to change than rather hide, right? So I would do that. It's just lean towards transparency. When you get feedback on certain areas you can correct, then correct it. But I would not necessarily like step too far back, because then you can go the other way, and now the team doesn't have the contact, they don't know what's going on, now they can't execute without the information. So it's just more about little things I did that because I was very like transparent with both sides, that it just was like kind of some churn from that.
100% makes sense. We have a final question here. We're just about to wrap up. This is from Sergio. Do you still write code? And at what headcount did you find yourself not writing code at all?
No, I don't, because Netflix, we focus people leadership and technical as two different tracks. And actually, if you write code, it sort of completely ruins the context over control model that we have, which is, as a leader, you should be setting context, not control, and telling the team exactly what to do. Now, obviously, I think for startups, you have to be different. Probably 2 jobs ago, I was still coding a little bit. And when I was at a startup, when I was CTO, I wrote a bunch of like Go and Ruby and Elixir and all that stuff. But now I think what you realize is like people leadership is its own craft, and you have to actually get really good at it. People who think, oh, I'm a tech lead, I could just move into people leadership. Like maybe. And so it's a craft you have to build. It's something you actually have to learn, just like coding. And the problem is it's harder than coding, because coding, at least you have docs. You have clear docs on how to write and read the syntax and semantics. There's no clear docs on semantics of humans, right? Like, how do you approach giving feedback? How do you approach receiving feedback? I mean, if you listen to all the things, we could probably spend an hour on each of those topics, right? And I've not even tapped into all that I can learn in those areas, which means it's its own craft that you have to get really good at, and you always have to learn. And so if you're writing code, I kind of question how good and how much investment are you making to be a great people leader?
100%. And, I can say when I was doing that, trying to do that as a CTO, I can say, you definitely get feedback from the other folks in the code base. Like, I don't want to give feedback to the CEO or the CTO. Right. I don't want to give feedback, right? Like, it makes it unsafe, the code base unsafe, the more senior you are diving into that, right?
Yeah.
All right, Bruce, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. It's so interesting to hear your perspective. And I know that just, being at Netflix, which has an amazing engineering culture and a lot of folks know about it, it's famous in Silicon Valley. It was really, really cool to hear from you. So hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks, David.